Greetings. I'm Raju. I'm on faculty at the University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and serve as the co-editor-in-chief of VideoGIE, along with Todd Barron, and my associate editors are Ryan Law from University of Michigan and Shu Tang from University of Mississippi. Today we have the great honor of interviewing my role model, Nageshwar Reddy. Nagi is the chairman of the Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, past president of the World Endoscopy Organization, and recently he received the prestigious award from the President of India. Greetings, Nagi. Welcome to Houston. Welcome to MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I would also like to share, Nagi comes from a family of physicians. He is a third-generation physician. His grandfather was a leader in medicine, a pathologist. His father, Dr. Bhaskar Reddy garu, was my dean, and I had the privilege of joining medical school when he was a dean. And I decided to take up GI after seeing you at PGI. Nagi, thank you so much for doing this. As part of this interview, we want to help younger generation learn about you and your career and your advice to the junior folks in GI. So let's talk about your early phase in your career and how it impacted in your decision process to take up GI.
First of all, thank you, Raju, for having me on this program. I think this is a very interesting concept. My interest in gastroenterology started when I was doing my internal medicine. This was in Chennai. Now it used to be called Madras at that time. I was doing my internal medicine, and just then the hepatitis B was actually in news, because Bloomberg, who discovered this, had visited Madras, and I was doing my internal medicine. So he was a big hero for all of us. So this was going on, and I was actually very interested in hepatology at that time, and that's the reason why I actually came into gastroenterology. And then, of course, I then realized that the best place to do gastroenterology at that time was at the Postgraduate Institute in Chandigarh. Because there's an entrance exam, I applied, I got in, and I was quite delighted to be training in gastroenterology. So that's how it initially started. This was in 1982. I finished my fellowship in 1984. I was continued my interest in hepatology. In fact, in 1983, I published some work on hepatitis B in the pediatric population in the Lancet, and that caught the attention of Professor Dame Sheila Sherlock, who actually visited us at that time at the PGI. She visited hepatology, and she was also quite interested that I come over and train with her in hepatology. And all this was going on, and then what happened was that suddenly I got deviated to endoscopy, and part of it was because of Professor Jang Bahadur Dilawari, who was then the professor of hepatology but doing a lot of endoscopy work, and he did the first endoscopic extraction of CBD stones in India. I remember it was somewhere in late 70s. It created quite a news at that time in India in all the newspapers, and Dilawari was quite doing a lot of good endoscopy work, and I sort of started getting interested in endoscopy. And much later, I just finished my fellowship, I decided that endoscopy is going to be the place that I was going to go into. And that time, video endoscope was just coming in 1986. If you remember, Welsh Allen came out the first video endoscopy model, and we were all very excited about watching these video endoscopes. So in fact, I started getting interested in that, and much later when Sheila Sherlock wrote to me saying, "What happened? Are you not coming for hepatology fellowship?" I'd write back and tell her that I'm more interested in endoscopy, not in hepatology, and of course she was quite disappointed. And sometime later, when she actually met me in one of those European meetings, she just looked me up and down, said, "So after all, you're a technician now." She didn't have much regard for endoscopy, and endoscopy, I think at that time, was not too much of a science. We didn't have many studies which were very sort of randomized control studies that we're seeing now. In fact, the first study I remember came in late 1980s when they're looking at gallstone pancreatitis. David Carlock and his team, and they showed that endoscopic intervention was supposed to be useful. Till then, I think it was not still considered as science. So we are all very mechanical in that sense, not true scientists. So it wasn't very popular to be taken up as a separate profession, but to me it was very exciting because I saw all these video endoscopes coming in. You could do something for the patient very actively, like removing stones from the bile duct or stopping bleeds and so on. So, this is how I started my first interest. And the first workshop that I attended, I remember, was the Hong Kong workshop in 1985. They used to have this big workshop in Hong Kong in Prince of Wales Hospital, which was run by that time by Sidney Chung and Joseph Lewing. And Peter Cotton used to be the guest faculty most of the time, and they didn't have the actual video endoscopes till then 85. They used to have this large endoscope, which was actually large camera, which was fit onto the fiber optic endoscope, and then people used to see it on the screen. But even then, it was very exciting to see people like Peter Cotton, Casey Ubrisky, Nipso Hendra, Michel Cremo, all of them on the big screen they are doing. It was, I think that's how I got very passionate and interested in endoscopy. So, after finishing my initial fellowship in Chandigarh, I came to Hyderabad. I sort of wanted to settle at Hyderabad in an academic institution. So, I joined Nizam Institute of Medical Sciences, where we didn't have a gastroenterology department. So, we started by purchasing all the endoscopies initially, and at that time it was fairly crude. There were still fiber optic endoscopes. We didn't have our fluoroscopy machines. In fact, in 1980s it was very rare for endoscopy units or gastroenterologists to have their own fluoroscopy machines. We used to go to the radiology department very often at the mercy of the radiologists. They used to give us one afternoon, one week, and then we used to do all our procedures. And you can imagine how we used to carry all those endoscopes, not very hygienic, and then do these procedures. So, it was a very not a very romantic beginning, but I think slowly over a period of time things have changed a lot. Now it's everybody has their own fluoroscopy units, and when I look back, sometimes I think we are giving it too easy to our juniors. Everything is spoon fed, the departments are well set up, they just have to come and start doing procedures. But we had to go through a different journey. But I think this journey was interesting, and this journey was also useful in the sense that we sort of had to innovate a lot on our way. There were times when we were doing endoscopy where the fluoroscopy machines were not very good, and we had to sort of use several pictures to actually come to a conclusion. We sometimes had to interact with a radiologist, which we rarely do now. It's just the technician and endoscopist. There are a lot of things that were involved in this innovation process, and especially I remember endoscopic accessories. And somewhere in 90s, I actually visited Nipso Hendra because I heard that he was doing a lot of innovations, and especially for third world countries what was useful. So, I spent some time with Nipso Hendra, and I saw how he was making his own plastic stents, how he was making baskets, nets, and so on. So, when I came back in 90 to the Nizam Institute, we started doing all this. We used to buy this long 10 French tubing from a German company, and we used to make our own stents, how to make flaps and so on. So, we used to have a small sort of accessory factory in our departments, and we used to have a blowtorch which we are doing all this. So, this was the exciting period when we started innovating a lot, and I think that has been helpful. Of course, now everything is purchased, now everything is going to be from the companies who have everything fabricated. So, this was the initial phase when we started, and at that time in India there were hardly 5 or 6 good therapeutic endoscopic units in the country. So, not many. We used to have large volumes, and there were days we were doing 50, 60 ERCPs singly, in fact, because of these volumes. And of course, now we have over 200 good therapeutic endoscopic units in the country, still less for 1.2 billion population, but I think it's improving. Because the economy is better, more centers are now starting to have their own fluoroscopy. Video endoscopy, I think, has made a dramatic difference. In early 90s, we started getting these video endoscopes, and I think now it's almost always only video endoscopes. And in terms of teaching and propagating the science and knowledge of endoscopy, I think it's made a dramatic difference, and that's how it spread. My desire always was to spread this knowledge of therapeutic endoscopy in the country. We started small. It was actually myself and my partner Dr. G.V. Rao who started initially, and then groups of people joined later. And along the way we decided that you can't specialize into one area of endoscopy, it's subspecialized now. So, I sort of more concentrated on pancreaticobiliary endoscopy, more onto procedures like POEM and all. And there were other colleagues who were concentrating on upper GIs and colon related problems and so on. So, we are sort of subspecialized over the period of time now into different branches of endoscopy, and we have now built up a team of about 20 endoscopists who work in different areas. And I think to me this has been the most satisfying thing, that we could from nothing build a unit which is now has a fairly advanced therapeutic endoscopy setup.
So, one thing, Nagi, that impressed me most when I started my career in Chandigarh, I was an intern and you were the senior fellow. You took time to teach us, and that made a huge impact. At that time, a lot of people wanted to go into cardiology, but after you came to Chandigarh, a lot of young guys started taking up gastroenterology. And I'm sure you impacted a lot of careers by going out of your way to share and excite people. Tell me how you built this huge team. You know, you have a fantastic group of endoscopists, surgeons, pathologists, and this fantastic institute called the Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, probably the first of its kind, maybe I could say first of its kind in the world to have a program like that. Tell me about that, because that will be helpful for younger generations to think outside the box.
So, we started initially with in fact, I was working in the Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences as a full-time professor, but it was disappointing in the sense that in India there are a lot of governmental regulations, and we are not getting enough funds to improve our department. We have a lot of patients, but we are not able to get endoscopes, we are not able to get accessories, and we are not able to get personnel to work with us. So, I decided at one point of time that unless I do something which is different, I will just sort of get into the system and going to go on without doing much. So, I just came out, and actually I started initially, myself and Dr. G.B. Rao started together about 35 years back, a small clinic, a gastro clinic. These are just 2 rooms. One was fluoroscopy room for doing all the fluoroscopy procedures, the other was a standard room, and we had one small cleaning room, and that was it. We started in a small premises which we rented out, office space, and started doing this. Looking back, I think we are quite adventurous in that, because we are doing a lot of very risky procedures in this outpatient ambulatory setup with just the small facilities. We are doing very invasive procedures, but fortunately we got through. And then as we went through, we realized that for doing a proper endoscopy work, you require, it is not a single endoscopy is not isolated by themselves. You must have a whole setup, a multidisciplinary setup where you have surgeons, radiologists, all kinds of physicians, everybody working together, and that is how we got this idea that it should be a bigger institute, an Asian Institute of Gastroenterology. We actually started the Asian Institute of Gastroenterology in 94, again about 23 years back. What happened was that one of our patient was a very rich donor. In fact, he was the chief minister of one of the states, had a acute emergency problem, and we had to fly to another state to go and relieve this through an ERCP, and he said, okay, this is something very wonderful, what do you want? And they said, this large building that you have in Hyderabad, why don't you? So, he donated that to us, and that is how it started. So, we started with about 200 beds initially, and when we started this 200 bedded gastroenterology hospital, everybody told us, you know, you are crazy, you think you will have so many patients in gastroenterology who are going to occupy this space. Cardiology okay, oncology okay, but not gastroenterology. But we have shown that this can be possible. So, over a period of time, when we started this, we put up a large endoscopy. At that time, 10 rooms endoscopy unit, people were, it was quite. And then what we did was we went into this educating the doctors mode, where we had a lot of CMEs, where we would do CMEs and educate the doctors, and that attracted a lot of young doctors to come in and then do endoscopy. We, in the initial stages, irrespective of whether they were physicians or surgeons, we were training them in endoscopy, and slowly we got very specialized people who after the gastroenterology wanted to subspecialize and came and joined us. So, we built this team. Now we have 20 active endoscopists in the team, and presently we are going to a new hospital which is almost 1000 beds gastroenterology. And as we got along, we realized that not only is physicians, gastroenterologists, radiologists, but you have to have other groups like oncologists also coming with you, because GI oncology is a fairly big large segment of our patients. And so, now we have a separate GI oncology unit with linear accelerators and so on in this large hospital. So, I think it has been a journey of more than 30 years. It was gradual, stepwise. We had a lot of help not only from the local communities, but from the donors. I think we had a lot of donors who gave us, otherwise to build this and just practice on a commercial basis is extremely difficult. One has to build these institutions based upon trust and based upon donations which come in from the public, and that we have been extremely, I think, happy that we have been able to generate this. We also realized that not only should we be serving the population which can afford this, but a large segment of the population a country can't afford. So, what we did is we asked some of our donors to donate to create these big endoscopy vans. So, in these endoscopy vans we had rooms where we can do endoscopy, colonoscopy, ultrasound and so on. And we would send these vans out into the community where they go into the small villages, they will park there, and then this is totally free for the patients. And then we used to have large number of patients from the surrounding villages come in there, and we do all sort of endoscopy procedures, endoscopy, colonoscopy, even banding and polypectomies and so on in this setup. And this has again been very gratifying, because we have actually now crossed almost 10 million patients, 10 million people actually who have been treated with this in different villages without any costs, largely supported by donations and also some amount of support from the federal government. In fact, the Indian Space Organization has given us satellite connection. So, from our hospital we can connect to these endoscopy vans throughout the state, and then we get back pictures, live pictures when endoscopy is being done by, say, a junior doctor or a resident there. We watch it in the main hospital and tell him, okay, do this. And so, it's been good training mode for our junior doctors and also a good community service which has given us a lot of satisfaction. So, what happened is, with all these activities, the educational activities for doctors, the community activities and so on, gastroenterology became more and more popular in this part of the country. There was a recognition that there is a significant load of gastrointestinal patients who require these endoscopy services, and that there is a need for more people to train. So, in India now, gastroenterology has become the #1 specialty in which internal medicine residents are looking into. Cardiology and others have come behind now. So, I think this is a development which has occurred in the last 10 years in India.
So, let me ask you, looking back, at what point in your career did you envision what you're going to build, and how did you go through that process?
So, right from the beginning, I think maybe even 30 years back, I had this passion that we have to have an international standard endoscopy units in the country. The problems we faced were financial, and also the problems we faced was in terms of endoscopy hygiene, for example, is not given enough attention in the country. We had problems in terms of constantly getting endoscopic accessories like what happens in the West, and of course trained personnel. So, these were the 4 areas of deficiencies. I realized is that unless we concentrate on these areas and try and improve on each of these areas, personnel was easy because you could train personnel and so on. Equipment again started getting easier because 2 things happened. One is of course the donors, and second, endoscopy companies realized that the large volumes here, and for them they can, in fact, we get a lot of endoscopies on donations from endoscopy companies, because not only because of the volumes, they know that these centers in India, training centers, are going to be centers which can actually enhance their endoscopic sales also, because trainees come and then watch what's happening, they go back and set up. So, India is one of very rapidly developing endoscopic centers in the world now, and it's partly because of so many training centers coming up. So, because of that, I realized very early that if you set up a training center, and if you set up a center which is doing a lot of good advanced endoscopy work, automatically rest of the things will follow, and this is what actually happened. So, this was from the very beginning. It took us a long time to establish this present unit, which we now have about 30 rooms of very high standard, all supported by again very good endoscopy devices.
You know, I also admire you for working with the Surgical Society in the United States to help trainees to come and train at your place, right?
Yeah, so we have actually several societies now. SAGES, for example, is now sending every year they send a certain number of surgeons, endoscopists to come and train with us, and this is one of the things we did very early. In fact, myself and GV Rao. GV Rao also himself is an endoscopist, although he does a lot of advanced surgery. We decided that endoscopy should not be confined to just physicians or so on. I think even surgeons who are very good or doing hepatobiliary or gastro surgery should be able to do endoscopy work. So, our unit has been in that sense more holistic, that we have both surgeons and physicians doing endoscopy work. So, we trained a lot of surgeons also, and we also have similar tie-ups with the ESG, European Society of GI Endoscopy, and APSD, which is the Asia Pacific Society of Digestive Endoscopy. So, we have slots where these endoscopic units can send their people. What we now advise is that for advanced endoscopy training, it's better that they spend at least 3 to 6 months, not short periods. At least most of them spend 6 months minimum with us, and in this period fairly get used to the large volumes that we have. They get used to doing several endoscopic procedures. We also want people now to focus on specific areas. Somebody comes and tells me, I want to do therapeutic endoscopy. I ask him, which area do you want to specialize in, say pancreaticobiliary area, third space endoscopy, or you want to do say colonoscopy or enteroscopy, small bowel. So, I think we have now come to an era of specialized endoscopy, and that you can't be good in all the procedures, you have to subspecialize.
So, being a great fan of yours, Nagi, I want to ask you, say for example, somebody comes to you and says, how do I build a career? And what are the key ingredients to build a young guy's career so that he can do a meaningful work and impactful work and service to the community? How should one plan their career?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I think the first thing that somebody who has just finished his gastroenterology fellowship, for example, has to have a clear vision of what he wants to do. He wants a career, because it's just not general gastroenterology now. There are several things that he will have to do. The first thing is he'll have to have a clear vision of what he wants to do in future. Does he want to go into a smaller town, set up a gastroenterology practice and try and help the community there? Does he want to go into an academic gastroenterology, or does he want to go into the big city, join one of these groups and then subspecialize into different areas? This clear vision is very important. Now, once he has a clear vision of what he wants to do, then I think it's a question of passion. Passion is very important. Unless you are very passionate about doing what you want to, like doing endoscopies, you are very passionate about that, or even hepatology, you are very passionate about that, you can't do that particular job in a good way. So, I think you should have a clear vision, you should have a passion, and then you must know his limits. You know, everybody, for example, everybody wants to be a Peter Cotton or Nipsohendra, but I think there are limits in terms of skills that you can develop. Each person has a different skill set, so he must know his limits. He must also know the surroundings, the limits of the surrounding or the environment. For example, if he has a lot of other financial commitments, he can't go into academic medicine or develop endoscopy, then I think he should start thinking about what he should do. So, you should know your limits, that is very important, and then whatever you want to do, you must pursue with a lot of patience. If you have patience and passion, you get a lot of goodwill from the community to support you now most of the time, and then you can achieve whatever you want to do. It's going to be a long process. Unfortunately, most youngsters today want to do it overnight. You know, tomorrow they want to become the best ERCPist in the world or best endocrinologist. That doesn't work out. I think it's very important to have this patience and long term goal. The other important thing is, I think it's very important, endoscopy is not only a science but also an art. It's important to observe with a master what he's doing, and then the master is not only doing technical parts of endoscopy, there are several other aspects of how he's talking to the patients, what is his involvement in terms of empathy. I think empathy is very important for endoscopists, empathy with the patient and the relatives. All these are very important component of endoscopist, and I would suggest that for juniors, that not to straight plunge into this, but to work with a master for some time, see how these people who are very successful are doing, and then you have a role model to follow and then follow them. In fact, in our career, I remember there were many role models we had. Of course, the Dilawari started off initially, but there was Nipsohendra, Peter Cotton, Michel Kramer. All of them were not only great endoscopists, but I think the way they communicated with the patient was also something that we learned from. That's very important.
I want to thank you, Nagi. You have been my own personally great role model, and I really appreciate you doing this interview for VideoGIE. VideoGIE being an open access journal, we hope that the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy will reach out to the whole world, and I'm sure a lot of people from India and Southern Asia and the rest of the world will benefit from this interview. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you for having me.